Facebook. Good morning, Blog Talk. Good morning, YouTube. Good morning. Today is Friday, August the 31st. We're talking midterms, everybody. Midterms, the winning formula. All this excitement versus real strategy. Good morning. Of course, I have my trusty co-host with me. But Democrats are on fire this week with the victory of Florida's gubernatorial candidate, Andrew Gillum. They're equally fired up about Georgia's gubernatorial candidate, Stacey Abrams, and Maryland's gubernatorial candidate, Ben Jealous. However, is this excitement enough? Democrats have an uphill battle in the 2018 midterms, and they need voters to come out of the woodworks, as the old folks would say. But what is the real strategy? What is the real strategy to get voters to the polls? Excitement about Black candidates in these key races may not be enough. I am your host, Tamara Johnson Shealy. Thank you for joining me on this week's broadcast. Always have my trusty co-hosts with me. Let's see where they are. Let's see. My friend, David. There he is. David, how are you this morning?
I'm doing fine.
Pull your camera down, David. You're looking like you're sitting on the floor. That is perfect. Okay. Good morning. Let's see who is my other trusty co-host, Mr. John Armwood. Mr. John.
Good morning. How are you?
Good morning. How are you?
Good morning, David. How are you doing?
Good morning, John.
Good morning, y'all. This morning in the background, there's Aretha Franklin's funeral services. It's starting to happen. People are starting to march into the church. A lot of famous people are in attendance. You can see Reverend Sharpton, Jesse Jackson, Bill Clinton, Louis Farrakhan. I saw T.D. Jakes up there on the stage. There's a lot of people paying their dear respect to the Queen. All hail the Queen, our Queen of Soul, Miss Aretha Franklin. So, but we're here. We're here this morning. We're here talking about those midterms, the midterms that are coming up right here in November. Andrew Gillum pulled it off down in Florida, guys.
Yes, he did. Yes, he did.
Did y'all watch it? David, did you pay attention to that race?
I did, yes.
Everybody's excited. We got Stacey Abrams here in Georgia. We got Ben Jealous over in Maryland. These Black candidates that are maybe our first ever in the history of this country to be elected to governors, to be governors of Georgia, Florida, and Maryland. It's history in the making right here. But is excitement enough? Is it enough? Is it enough?
Well, the good thing about excitement is that it generates turnout. And that's a positive, because this election, being a midterm election, is definitely going to be one about turning out the base. And the Democratic Party, I hope, and I just hope that the Democratic Party focuses on turning out its base instead of this policy, which I consider to be a little bit silly, trying to convert people to vote Democrat by diluting its message though it has broader appeal. Midterms are about getting your base to the poll. It's grassroots stuff, busing people to vote, going out canvassing, getting people to come out and making sure they have a way of getting out.
What you think, David?
Oh, I didn't.
David, are you asleep? Are you asleep?
I'm not. I just worked out for 45 minutes, so I'm pretty too mellow right now.
So you're on cloud 9. Workout high.
Well, I was going to say that while I agree with John about the base election, in midterms are base elections, and I also agree with him that it's a fool's errand to go after the people who might be so-called in the middle between the Republicans and Democrats and dilute the message in that way. I think that there's a way of drawing people out of the woodwork with the robust progressive messages that these three candidates have been expressing, and those robust progressive platforms that they're running on, with some attention being paid to lower income whites as well as African Americans and other working people, could have enormous results, could really be a strategic change. So when we're talking about the idea of a real strategy, that's, I think, something to pay attention to, is that the demands that are being put forward by a core of African American and Latinx. I don't know how do you pronounce that anyway. Latinx.
Yeah.
Folks are actually the demands of the working class, and they're in the interests of European American workers to have a working class that is stronger, that is less vulnerable to things like documentation or being on welfare, or all of these people who are undocumented or in prison or on welfare. They are part of the work. They are actually the most vulnerable people within the working class, and for them to be out there desperate is bad for the rest of working people, because
no question about that. And that's one contribution that I'm going to have to give to Bernie Sanders, is he's been very focused on that message, and he seems to have gotten the Democratic progressives on that same message, and it's been a very straightforward message that does cut across class. I mean, it also cuts across class lines, but it cuts across racial lines, etc. And working on education, housing, healthcare, those basic bread and butter issues that affect families. And if you notice the policy issues, if you notice the candidates from Ocasio to our gubernatorial candidate, Stacey Abrams, they're all on that same message. And I'm really enjoying seeing that, because that's message discipline that I think the Democrats have needed and have not had, because the mainstream Democratic Party has had no message, to be quite honestly, as far as I can see.
Yeah, I think you're right about that. But I also would say that the European Americans who are in this coalition, or whatever you want to call it, have a special responsibility. African Americans and Latino Americans have their own organizing to do. But if the European Americans, I keep on using that word as opposed to white, because I don't like
more accurate
white. If those folks are going to be woke, they're going to have to start getting together to wake up other white people. That's their special responsibility, their special task in this arrangement, or whatever we want to call it. I don't like to call it an alliance or a coalition. I call it the solidarity movement. They have got to, let me acknowledge the fact that I'm here in this. I'm in the minority in this.
Oh, I'm hearing Lech Lewensa from Poland. Solidarity.
Well, the solidarity message has got to be raising the issues and raising the case that what we are talking about is in the interests, that is in the class and economic interests of European American working people. It's not in their racial interests. And that's the rub. That's where we really have to start thinking and acting differently when we European Americans who are woke organize and get out there to knock on doors and do all of these other things that we're supposed to do about voting, because voting is only one part of this whole picture. If we're really going to take a strategic view, we have to think about organizing in a much longer term and in a much deeper way than simply going and voting for the same candidate, right?
Oh yeah, because traditionally organizations were controlled by the local parties in partnership in the Democratic Party, particularly with the unions and local groups, church groups, things like that. The unions have really been systematically destroyed in this country. So their power base is much smaller than it used to be. In some areas, particularly in the North, you do have some remnants of the union struggle,
right,
and organizations there. But here, we don't have that. So we have a much tougher job here in the South, and organizing and getting groups of people to get out and vote, and also to disseminate information in a way that people can identify with it.
Right.
If you have everybody working in a particular trade or job, it's easier to focus issues more narrowly on their particular needs and motivate them. But we don't have that. So we've got to really get people to understand. I differ with you a little bit on the interest there, because I do think that many white people feel, and I think they justifiably feel, that they do have a privilege that they can get jobs in particular,
right,
the minority people may not get, and that the evening of the playing field could actually hurt them in the short term and in the narrow. I agree with you 100% long term that's trivial, given what we're really facing with the inequality in this country, which is just, it's gone beyond England. We are the most unequal of any advanced industrialized power by a long slot. Your 9% control, the wealth of this country in a way that they had never have in American history. And it's always been bad. America has always been an oligarchy. It has never been a true an economic democracy. It's been an economic oligarchy, meaning there's a small group of people at the top that control the wealth in this country.
Yeah.
And it's becoming more and more concentrated. And so we have to raise people's awareness that the reason that we're all suffering, and the reason that working people, and I'm talking about middle income working people also, because they are part of this. I mean, white collar professionals are part of this. The reason that we are struggling as a whole, all of these groups, is because the goodies, the benefits of the economy are going to the top tier. So we have to organize around things. And they're diversionary tactics. I look at charter schools as an example. It's been like, I see television ads right now in Georgia, targeting minority communities in particular on charter schools. And they're very misleading. Mm-hmm. They're telling people, you should have a choice to where to send your schools. But what they're not telling you is they're diverting monies from the public schools for everyone into these charter schools. So it's going to divert resources and water down the already poor resources we have in the public schools. Our public schools are dilapidated. Funding has been cut back. Teacher pay has not been raised. Teachers are in large part demoralized. So instead of fixing the problem, they're coming up with this privatization scheme where these companies can come in and run charter schools and let the public schools go. And that, to me, is disastrous. And I see it every evening on the evening news here in Atlanta.
But there's some excitement around Gillum in Florida, because he wants to raise the salary to $50,000 annually for teachers. I think that is definitely something to get excited about.
Oh, I agree. Gilliam, again, is running one of those disciplined, progressive platforms that David was talking about that cuts across ethnic lines and really speaks to working people. His message has been consistent. Stacey Abrams' message has been consistent in that manner.
I think it's really interesting. It's Andrew Gillum, right? Andrew is his first name. His response to the Ron DeSantis comments.
Oh my gosh, monkey!
But,
monkey it up.
He was not distracted by that.
Yeah, he was.
Look, we were.
Yeah.
But we're supposed to be. He's supposed to keep on going, and then we attack. That's the way we do it. You do it.
He stayed right on message. He said, I'm not interested in, Ron DeSantis can do whatever he wants. Andrew Gillum pointed out that 70% of the people in this country do not have $1,000 in a savings account. So, he's really speaking to these exactly what you were saying, that there's a whole, range of people that think they're middle class that are extremely vulnerable. And all of that vulnerability is about coercion and lowering wages and increasing profits and maintaining control over over working people, whether they work in an office or in tech or on welfare or in prison. And that's what we really need to see is the commonalities and build that sense of consciousness that we are all in the same working class, even though I think of, one of the ways you can think of privilege, white privilege, is that you have the privilege of not getting two of your fingers cut off. So you hold up those two fingers all the time. You show how proud you are of the fact that you haven't had those, your pinky and your ring finger cut off. And that's the kind of absurdity that we're dealing with when it comes to this kind of thing. So I would mention one other thing, that thing about the 9.9% that I keep saying and holding up. I found the book again. John put, I know, snuck it back into my house. This rigged by Dean Baker.
Your place.
The point I want to make is that Dean Baker is making a very interesting argument in this book that I haven't talked about yet, and that is that corporate profits have really not risen over the last 35 or 40 years. They have remained pretty much where they've been. That's his argument. I'm not saying that I necessarily agree with it. What that means is what he is arguing is that all of the surplus in the society is going to the 0.1% and then this larger group, the 9.9%. And it's going there through income transfers and through monopoly control that these people have over their professions. This is very interesting. What that means is that that automation, and computerization and globalization are really not creating the transfer of wealth from the 90% to this upper 10%. It's the whole structure of the economy, the protectionism of the elite professions and the tax arrangements and all of these other things that have created this transfer of wealth. And every time, so race and the 10% really interact with each other. And what happens to, I think, to European American working people in the 90% is that they are furious that their potential for getting into the 9.9% has been so restricted and limited. So, what used to be, dog whistle politics has now become megaphone politics about race. And that's where we really need to hit on European American folks or focus their attention. They are not getting into that 9.9%.
They're not putting it into the $100,000 to $200,000, upper middle class, and
you ain't safe. You ain't safe until you're up there in that category.
And they're not getting there anymore. I mean, I'll give you a concrete example. I mean, customer service jobs used to be, for American Utilities, used to be a good job. It was a solid job where people could get out of the hard laboring factory type work and get into a job where they could, live nice, have good health care, and live a decent life, buy a home. That's no longer, because of globalization, that's no longer here. I was on the phone between 5 and 6 o'clock this morning, an hour, fighting with Comcast because they owe me $100, $200 actually, for their phone service. And I'm talking to a representative in the Philippines.
Yeah.
And I'm having to fight up the chain of command because the first guy I got was horrendous. I finally got a lady who was very good. Those used to be jobs that we used to do.
Yeah.
I used to do that job for Con Edison, and I made in real dollars more there and with benefits than I ever did practicing law. and that's the reality of it, because
I worked for Con Edison, John,
have dropped down.
Yeah, and I worked for Con Edison way back when.
That's why I'm mentioning it.
I was working a jackhammer in the street, but that was a good job too.
Oh, it was a very good job. Are you kidding me?
You were fireproof, as they used to call it. Remember, you didn't get laid off.
You didn't get laid off, and they had these until you reach your maximum salary every 3 months. You went up $6.
Right.
If you remember those raises, and then you would get a yearly raise on top of that.
And the same was true in the telephone company.
Yeah,
and
exactly.
when I was
jobs, and that was my whole point. Those type of jobs that allowed people to live comfortable lives without having to worry about healthcare, paychecks. I mean, when we're a little bit older, David and I mean, Tamara's this young, beautiful woman, but we're a little bit older, and we could get health. We could have a doctor come to our house 24/7 with the Mutual Aid Society, and not have to worry about paying anything. That's how things used to be. They're no longer like that anymore. And that's one point I'm trying to make, that the average middle income worker, the person that sees themselves as middle class, are living a much lower economic lifestyle than was lived back in the 1970s and early 80s.
Yeah.
The wealthy have got wealthier and the middle class has gotten poorer.
Yeah. And more insecure. I mean, that's really critically important about how insecure life has become for ordinary folks in the United States. In fact, my situation as a college professor, if I had gotten my PhD 10 or 15 years before I did, I would have been in a tenure track job. I would have gotten tenure, and I would have had a job for life unless I did something absolutely outrageous. And those jobs have gone away too. Most about 2/3 of all academics today, teaching and researching today, are in these precarious temporary positions, working either 1 year or part-time. And someone like me, who has 25 years teaching experience, one book published and another book on the way, I can only get adjunct teaching jobs, and guess how much they pay? $2,500 to $3,000 a course.
Yeah, I mean, it's very, very true. You and I were both in the same situation. I was a college professor for 14 years. And I mean, I started out as an adjunct. I fortunately was able to get a full-time position at one university, but ended up getting laid off in financial cutbacks. Then I stayed at another school for 6 years until it closed. And I was a full-time professor. There was no tenure. And neither of the jobs was I tenure track because they were cutting those out, as David said. But at least I knew I had a job until I got sick and then the school closed. And then I didn't. But it's very precarious. I remember the generation before, if you got into a professorship, you got into a tenure track, you were going to be there until you decided to leave.
Right.
So these midterms are, when we talk about these midterms, y'all.
Thank you, Mommy.
We have to really talk about like job security. Americans want to have secure employment. They want to know that they can get a job and they can sustain themselves and their families. And when we talk about raising the minimum wage, these midterms, we can't just be all caught up in the excitement of, we may have Democrats. How about we get the right people? I saw an article, one state, and I have to go back and look which state it was, but the Republicans actually raised the minimum wage to $15 an hour. So we kind of have to start thinking about strategy, real strategy, as far as Democrats are concerned, but just voters in general. We have to talk about real strategy. And if Democrats aren't doing what it takes for us to sustain ourselves and to sustain our families, those are the Democrats that we don't vote for.
No, I hear you. And I'm glad you mentioned that $15 an hour. Though these type of issues, which were seen extreme 3-4 years ago, have become mainstream. Mm-hmm. And the way they've become mainstream is that we've had so many people repeating them around the country. Mm-hmm. And that's, again, the power of messaging. We've got to stay on message. Try living on $11 an hour right now in the Atlanta area, let alone a major city.
No.
Yeah, it doesn't work very well.
Yeah. And also more than just messaging, John, has been the movement of the actual movement of workers in minimum wage jobs, in fast food, and
definitely. Yeah. In New York, there was a huge thing with that, with McDonald's and the other fast food restaurants.
We have a mass movement out there, the way that we have a mass movement around Black Lives Matter. We have a mass movement around, the Dreamers and documentation for undocumented workers. And what's going on right now is a mass movement of incarcerated people. There's a general strike of people who are this very week, are throughout across the country have organized a strike, and it's against slave labor. And remember, this is the issue. This is unpaid labor here in Georgia. These are state employees, if you want to call them that. They work for the state. They work for the state of Georgia. They do not get paid in other places around the country. They get paid, but it's $1 an hour or something.
11 cents an hour in many of the prisons. 11 cents. There was a report that came out yesterday, and Democracy Now! Yesterday did a large focus on Mississippi, where you've had this year with 47 deaths in the prison system. Right. I mean, it's horrendous. And the lady that runs the prison system was getting on there saying, this is not unusual, when the facts are just the opposite. It's been more deaths in the first 6 months than had been in any year in the previous 5-10 years. So, I mean, the prisons are being neglected. And I believe this all comes down from deregulation. The Justice Department is not investigating complaints of people who are in these situations. The cases are not making their way up.
Yeah.
Because we have Jeff Sessions, who is an enemy of human rights in this country. We have undocumented American citizens at the border. An article in the New York Times this week. Being turned away and kicked out of the country. Their documentation is being challenged here in the United States.
Right.
I mean, we are living in a time that I can only compare to the 1880s and 1890s that my father used to tell me about, that his granddad told him about, where basic rights that we have all had for a short period of time are being taken away again.
And I think that it's really interesting how much of this is focused on increasing the vulnerability of working people. Because the every time they do something like that to a somebody who has his Latino origins, and challenge their birth certificates, challenge their right to get a passport, it creates a ripple effect. It's terrorism. It's economic terrorism.
Most definitely.
But here's an interesting thing I think that's going on that we ought to think about strategically, and that is that what's been happening over the last this election cycle, leading up to this election cycle, is that there is a whole move in the at least through the U.S. South's Atlantic states. In other words, from Maryland to Virginia to North Carolina, South Carolina being the exception, to Georgia to Florida, there have been mass movements and political, electoral movements within the Democratic Party that have shifted the center of gravity, the political center of gravity, far to the left. Very, very interesting. I think that we're having this trend. You have Virginia was a stunning victory, last year. They didn't quite take the House, but they won all of the general, the statewide offices. We have a Democratic governor who squeaked into office in North Carolina, despite almost a dictatorship practically by the Republicans. Now in Georgia, we have this Stacey Abrams, and we have Gillum in Florida. But the thing is, one of the things that we haven't really considered is the down ballot races, and the down ballot races for state senator and state representatives. That's the places where political patronage comes in. And the Republicans have been in power long enough so that they can threaten both, they can bribe, it's carrot and stick. They can both bribe and threaten people with giving patronage and taking away patronage. That is a big, issue for people who are, particularly for folks who are vulnerable.
Well, let's stay there with that thought, David. I think that's a good point that you just made about how, what's happening from on the upper level politically. But when you think about it, Republicans are smart, right? Like, I'm going to give them a little credit here, because even if we win these gubernatorial races, if they control the House and the Senate, nothing even makes it to the governor's desk anyway.
Exactly.
That's very, very true. And that's where voter suppression becomes such a major issue in states in particular. I'm thinking of like Georgia and North Carolina, where it's been a major issue. We won, thank goodness, in Randolph County last Friday because of the pushback. They decided not to close those 7 of 9 precincts in that majority Black county. But this is going on all over the South. And these state elections are very important. And to get back to David's point that he made, it's happening not just in the South, where progressive candidates are challenging the mainstream. I mean, night before last, there was a heated debate between Mario Cuomo in New York and a woman, Nixon. I mean, who's coming for a more progressive position, because Cuomo has made. I'm sorry, I'm saying Mario Cuomo instead of his son Andrew. showing my age, but because he's been dealing with the Republican legislature and encouraging Democrats to go over in the sense that Tamara was talking about, and acting like Republicans. And so we have got to hold all of these people accountable, and the state legislatures make the decisions that affect us every day. The state schools, the county commissioners, the DeKalb County Commission, the Gwinnett County Commission here in Georgia, the Clayton County Commission, the Fulton County Commission. These commissioner positions make major decisions that affect us every day. They, yeah, and
I put the call-in number up, John. Let me just give everybody an opportunity. I know we don't have a big audience today. I know everybody's watching the Queen of Soul, Aretha Franklin's funeral is happening, and John McCain, his memorial service is happening too at the same time. So we'll definitely understand those of you that are paying respect. But if you are watching us, LIVE, our call-in number is 929-477-3442. Again, 929-477-3442, where we're talking about these midterms and the excitement versus real strategy. Being excited about these races and is great. You know, we need the energy, we need the momentum, but we got to have some real strategy. And if we're not talking about, you know, acknowledging the divide and being intentional about solidarity, as David always talks about, and bringing all people, Black, brown, and our white, David doesn't like the word allies, but bring them all into the fold, and let's have a movement to change these systems. Nothing's going to happen. Nothing different is going to happen. And Mr. John Armwood, we always talk about withholding that vote and holding our candidates and elected officials accountable to communities of color. And if they don't do the right thing, we're calling them out. And we're going to make sure that we encourage people to skip them on the ballot and withhold that vote. But right now, we're educating and empowering. We're not making people feel guilty or ashamed for not voting, but just be strategic. And that's what we're talking about today: is the strategy, a real strategy around these midterm elections.
And I would recommend that everybody, to follow up on that, get an advance copy of the ballot. I make sure I do that every primary, every general election. That way you can have time. Google has a lot of information. Google these candidates that you don't know. Read newspaper articles. See what their positions are on various issues. I know judgeships, it's very, very hard to know. That's like a club.
Yeah. Wow.
That's a club.
That's really tough.
And it's
it's supposedly nonpartisan.
Oh, please.
But you can't, that's the one simple indication that you might have about whether you think that this judge would be, somebody who would be supporting the interests of working people. So with no partisan, with no affiliation on the judgeships, it becomes a matter of doing actual research into their records, and that's very, very hard to do.
Former assistant district attorneys or district attorneys,
right.
They tend to be more conservative. Those are inherently conservative positions. You really want to know. Most judges have some political affiliations before they are judges.
Yeah,
you gotta look very, very careful.
So let me tell you guys. So I'm at Emory now. This is actually my second week, Emory Law School, and this is actually my second week. And we were having a in-class discussion about these judges, and there's so many people in law school tend to think that these attorneys and these people that have this legal training, these judges are they're doing the right thing. And I think I've lived long enough, and I think John, you can you kind of help me to remember that I'm an older student, so I've kind of seen more of how these judges and these attorneys and these people are not on the right side of history, a lot of them. And they're not doing.
That's a great way of putting it. Not on the right side of history. And we discussed this, as I had mentioned to Tamara earlier this week. My experience at Emory Law School was I met, and I'm gonna say what I said to you on the air. You know me, I'm outspoken. I met the saddest group of Black folks I had ever met in my life. The most conservative, non-progressive, self-aggrandizing group of Black folks I had ever met in my life. I was new to the South. I was from New York. Political consciousness was at a level 2 out of a scale of 10. And in fact, there were people who were being politically conscious. It was all about me, and getting mine and doing whatever it took to get mine.
I think, John, that's one of the things I keep saying about the 9.9%, below that 0.1%. That group includes those judges. Almost every judge is from that kind of background, and most of the district attorneys and prosecutors are from that kind of background.
Most definitely,
the ones who rise up, in other words, the ones who become So maybe not all lawyers are in the 9.9%, but a lot of them are, and out of that 9.9%, 97% are white. So it's that tiny little sliver of African Americans that you were mentioning at Emory Law are really just so far removed from, first of all, their own communities, but then from working people in general. And these are the folks who decide our fates, who decide the fates of working people, whether it be, about housing conditions or job conditions. How do you,
how are juveniles handled in the court system? It's major. It's one of my former classmates is the chief juvenile court judge in DeKalb County. So these positions are very, very important. They affect the lives of everyday people.
Yeah, absolutely. And that is really and if the people who are sitting in judgment of them have really no experience about what it's like to be, in dire straits, in the insecurity and living on the edge of poverty, if not below, in poverty, they have no empathy. They have their experience is that the whole system works. It works for them. So why can't it? Why shouldn't it be? Why should they extrapolate from their own experience? And when we get up to the level of the Supreme Court, you can see how rarefied these folks are, how rarefied their lives are. They really just have been in a hothouse, all of their lives, from cradle to retirement.
And then we have the exception where we get someone who comes from a poor background. Right. And I'm thinking of a certain uncle in particular, out from outside of Savannah, Georgia, who totally rejects his own background. And he's not a very bright man. I've had a couple of conversations with him over the years, and takes the other position. And you have these people who we commonly call sellouts that get in office, and they go against the people that they come from because they want approval so badly from the 9%.
Yeah.
Yes, I'm talking about a certain man by the name of Clarence Thomas.
Yeah.
And he comes from Sandfly, Georgia, which I'm from Savannah. And I can just tell you, even when I was a little girl in that area where we would visit that area, I didn't really live in that area, but I knew the area. And I can tell you there was, they call it Sandfly for a reason, because the roads were like dirt roads. And the houses that were back there were like shacks. Like, he comes from nothing.
Yes.
Yeah. And he benefited from affirmative action.
And he's not a bright man. I first encountered him in 1979.
Yeah, he can be used, John. He can be manipulated, and those are the kind of. Just be honest. Those are the kind of black and brown people that white America, those that are in that 9.9% that David's talking about, right, David? Those are the ones that they like those.
They reward, yeah.
They don't like people like me and you, John.
Well, particularly in Georgia, one thing I noticed, particularly in Georgia, they try to filter out people like you and I.
Oh yeah. They yeah, absolutely.
Because, I experienced that at Emory, but I was academically too strong.
Yeah,
but they couldn't do it.
Yeah.
But I did get blacklisted because I refused to participate in a mock trial competition and argue against affirmative action when the professor who was leading it was consulting for Clarence Pendleton's Justice Department under Ronald Reagan, who was trying to dismantle affirmative action. And I refused to do it and organized a group of students not to do it. And they came out and told me, we like people to participate. And one of my professors who liked me, in fact, who's still there, said, yes, you have been blacklisted. That's why you worked at King and Spalding your first year and you couldn't get a clerkship after that.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And honestly, John, I think, for me politically, because I could not be controlled, because I could not be manipulated, because I did speak truth to power. The same thing happens to those of us that speak out.
No, it's definite. I mean, I see that less in New York politics because I'm familiar with it. I mean, my ex-wife is a Supreme Court judge in New York. A former classmate from Emory is a criminal court judge in New York. And I mean, it's a little bit more open because the communities are more active. And that's why it's so important for us to be active on a community level to put pressure. This is why confrontation, I think, is so important. I really, really do. Because you have to demand that people respect you. You have to demand entry into the halls of power. You have to raise decision costs for people who try to keep you out. And I know,
you know what, John? It's people like us that when they keep us out, they just don't understand. We just get louder. We get worse.
Oh, yeah.
Right, David? It's not like we're going anywhere. We're just going to get louder. We're going to get worse. We're going to be more in your face. It's just going to be worse. So you might as well let us in. What you think, David? Jump in.
Well, I'm thinking again about how the power relationships have worked between Republicans and Democrats in the state of Georgia, where there has been, kind of a modus vivendi, that's been created. You get your kind of guaranteed election in your districts as long as you remain the minority. And you don't create a lot of waves, then we can work together. And I think that's really what's at stake in Georgia and also probably in Florida as well for these midterms, is that these cozy arrangements are now under threat. And the establishment Democrats are really put into a bind because they would I think that many of them would much prefer to just keep things as they are, where they can get elected and, keep their phony baloney jobs, as Blazing Saddles, said, and just, let the Republicans run the show without actually challenging the power relations that exist. So,
and you know what, David? On that note, what you just said is like you're so on point, because I realize as a candidate, the top of the food chain, the closer you get to the top of the food chain, those Democrats and those Republicans, they're the same people.
Yes,
they're working in tangent. They're the same people. They meet, they talk, they're on the same page. They know which ones of us they want to control, which one of us needs to go. They're working together.
Well, not only that, but it's also these informal and non-governmental organizations that are around, these advisory commissions.
Yes,
and all sorts of other boards of this, that, or the other thing that work with the big business interests, the banks, and all that other stuff, because that's the way that they're pro-business in the sense that they think that's the only way that you make jobs.
You think in old Atlanta, you think of Buckhead Progress. Sam Bassel's organization is an example of that on the Democratic side when the state was more Democratic. I mean, he had a huge organization.
Yeah. So you have all of these civic groups and the civil society that is also dominated by the same people. And so of course they can they have easy channels of communication and can plan things together, in the name of bipartisanship and cooperation and bringing business to Georgia, and all of these other things. And you hear it in the arguments that they're making, even on things like prison reform, where Deal can say, "Oh, this is a wonderful thing that we're doing," not mentioning the fact that they're going to keep tabs on the same folks, through computers and ankle bracelets and all of this other stuff, and they've created another business out of monitoring parolees.
Yeah. Florida is a great example of that.
Yeah, absolutely.
The outgoing governor Rick Scott, who was in bed with the prison industry, was the Prison Corporation of America, a very, very corrupt and brutal company that had been sued successfully by the federal government for having prisoners die in Mississippi and Alabama. He brought it into Florida, and he was always at their lobbying events, at their dinners. And it's just horrible. And these organizations are making money off of prisoners, and the treatment and the conditions are horrible. That's why the deaths in Mississippi I mentioned earlier are occurring. These are the private for-profit prisons.
Well, I would argue a little further, John. I would argue a little further on that for-profit prisons are really just the tip of the iceberg of what's actually happening in the state prison systems, which is that they are run on the basis of the free or almost free labor of the inmates. They are farmed out. They are contracted out to big corporations, to do back office type labor, and they also are the ones who actually provide the labor to sustain the prisons. If there were paid workers involved in any state prison system and in the federal prison system, it would be unsustainable. You could not provide it. It's now costs $80,000 a year to house somebody. It would probably cost $200,000 a year. It would break every state budget to keep this many people in prison. So the whole system is built upon the free and forced labor, the unpaid and forced labor of the inmates. And
this goes back to the fact that slavery did not end in 1865. Yeah. I mean, this type of having prisoners do work was a major issue from 1865 to 1941. In fact, in 1941, the Attorney General, after the Japanese attack on Pearl Harbor, issued Circular 3591 calling peonage, which is debt slavery, which is what they were doing at that time, a form of slavery, because slavery was going on. I mean, during World War I, my father was involved for the state of Florida in investigating slavery in the orange plantations.
Yeah. And labor is the great exception to the 13th Amendment, right?
Exactly.
What happened?
The person here on this panel and I were talking about this a couple of days ago.
But we also, since we're talking about Rick Scott, we should not forget that Rick Scott ran one of the biggest healthcare, health insurance companies, and was convicted of defrauding the federal government in the hundreds of millions of dollars. I mean, this is the guy who,
he's a scammer.
Yeah. So, that is part of the story. The other part of the story is that Florida is the place where the NRA has literally ruled the state. And I was just looking at an article in the New Yorker about the NRA in Florida, and this woman, Marion Hammer, is that her name? Hammer or Hammond?
I know you talk. I read the article.
Yeah. Yeah, and the New Yorker did an article on her maybe about a year ago.
Yes.
Something. She literally writes the legislation for the Republican Party in the state legislature. Nothing gets past her. I'm not just talking about gun laws. In Florida, was the vanguard of the
stand your ground.
Stand your ground laws. And it's really interesting. Trayvon Martin was killed in Sanford, Florida, which is right around Orlando, place that
always been an area of very heavy racism dating back to the 19th century. I know stories from the 19th century.
From downtown. This was a place. Sanford was a place where black people were actually driven out by white race riots.
Yes.
So that's what we're talking about. Then we're talking about by the way, Lucy McBath's son, whose name is Jordan Russell Davis. Jordan Davis was shot and killed in Jacksonville, Florida. And then we have Parkland, and the Orlando nightclub. Forget the name. What's the name? I don't know the name
of the club, but the killing is there. Yeah, I mean, outside the nightclub.
We really do have I don't know the statistics, but certainly just the anecdotal evidence suggests that Florida has really been a place where the gun laws have created conditions that have been, even more extreme than in other states in the South.
Florida has always been bad.
Yeah,
my dad told me stories of when he was a kid in Tallahassee, because his father, my grandfather, was the vice president of Florida A&M. They had signs that said "Read, nigga, and run," and as my dad used to say, they meant it.
Yeah. And we're at the top of the hour. These midterms and, these 2018 elections has to be more than excitement. It has to be more than people being, I appreciate the excitement. Like I say, we need the energy. We need this momentum. We need it. But it has to be about the issues. And we have to look at candidates and we have to hold them accountable to the issues that affect all of us. Communities of color, don't just give away that vote. Don't just because somebody has a D behind their name, you give them the vote. There's people on my ballot I will not be voting for, and we'll be talking about that as we get closer and closer to election time. Why I won't be voting for certain candidates on the ballot where I live, because if they don't have the issues of Black and brown communities as part of their platform and are intentional about doing something, because you're not going to talk the talk and don't walk the walk, because what you say you're going to do, trust me, we're going to be continuing to do these broadcasts, and we're going to definitely hold candidates and elected officials. We're going to hold your feet to the fire, and we're not playing with anybody as these elections are coming up and coming around. So it's always a pleasure to have my two trusty co-hosts. Mr. John Armwood is always on YouTube, everybody. He has a YouTube channel that he has a lot to talk about. Armwood Opinion is right there on the screen. So check him out on YouTube, Armwood Opinion, where he talks technology, he talks politics, and what's the other one? What's
culture?
Culture. He talks everything, y'all. Go check him out. It's a great watch. So find him on YouTube. Mr. David Slavin, he and I are doing a series, and we're going to be letting you know more and more about it. We want you to be a part of it. It's called White and Woke, and How Do I Wake Up Other White People? This is a definite something that you need to participate in if you are white and you are woke. You're white and you're woke, and there's many around you that aren't. Race and racism and race relations are at the root of this country's divide, and you're the only one talking about it. So trust me, this series is for you. David, are you excited about it? Because I am.
I am. I just want to extend an invitation also to people of color to participate, because it is the interaction that we're going to have, like we've been doing on this show, that's going to really make the changes, accelerate the changes that we need to take place. We need to be in communication, in dialogue with each other, building up trust and building up relationships, just the way that these three Black gubernatorial candidates have been doing for years. Everybody who talks about what they are doing, Gillum's and Abrams and Gillum, have all been working for years with grassroots organizations and building relationships, and that's where the power is coming from. It's not, it's not just excitement or inspiration. It's the fact that they have done the work, they've done the groundwork. So that's really important that we understand that, and not leave white working people out there twisting in the wind. We got to at least give them a choice.
Yeah, and that series is starts Thursday, September the 13th, and it runs through October 25th. It's every other Thursday in the month of September and October, 6:30 to 9:30, and it's online, so you can participate from the comfort of your own home. So be a part of this. It's a lot of great information. David is a great instructor, so this is going to be some value to a lot of you. So please participate. And again, I am Tamara Shealy, and we are at the top of the hour. Like I said, today was John McCain's memorial and Aretha Franklin's funeral. We definitely pay homage and respect to those that have gone on before us, but the work here continues. Right, John?
Resistance is not futile. We must organize, get a hold of your ballots, study who you're going to vote for. It takes homework. It doesn't take long. You can do this in less than a half an hour. Devote a half an hour to looking at your ballot and researching the candidates that you are going to vote for or withhold the vote from.
That's right. And again, I am Tamara Johnson Shealy. We'll see you next week, same time, same channel, right here on Facebook, right here on Blog Talk, and on YouTube. Have a great week.
Power to the people.
Power to the people.
Right on.